There are three things all wise men fear: the sea in storm, a night with no moon, and the anger of a gentle man. Patrick Rothfuss. The Dragon Pod, from Bending Not Breaking. Book 5, Ocean. Chapter 7, Sea Legs. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Dragon Pod. This is your host, Ben Pruitt, and we are on the last third of this season 5. I can't believe there's only 2 seasons left after this. It's going by so quickly. We just had our 5-year anniversary. There's just all kinds of cool things happening here, and I am really excited to talk about this episode because we have a guest today that is new to the podcast, and I am thrilled to welcome them. So let me introduce you all to Nasus Lee. Uses she, her pronouns, and is a professional animator by day, a professional doodler by night. And Nasus is a big fan of painting and eating, and sometimes at the same time. And you'll all be thrilled to know that she is an animation supervisor for The Dragon Prince and had a lot to do with the production of today's episode. So everyone join me in welcoming Nasus. Nasus, how are you today?
Hi, I'm pretty good. How are you?
I'm good. I got a little exercise today, got to play some disc golf. I've been writing a very large paper for class, but that's okay. I'm just putting that aside. We're going to get to that later. It'll be fine. But overall, pretty good. Um,
Nice.
what's going on with you in terms of I don't know very much about you. So what does a typical day look like for you?
Yeah, we wake up, make some coffee, pet
Nice.
my cat. And then depending on the day, I'll draw, go to the gym, hang out with some friends. I love going to coffee shops and things like that. So it's nice to explore the city.
Yeah. So what city do you hail from?
I live in Vancouver, BC,
Okay.
Canada.
Love it. Yeah, I have never been. It is on my list, partially because I've interviewed so many people from the Dragon Prince that are located there that I feel like I should go.
Oh,
Uh,
it's beautiful. It's so
yeah,
beautiful.
yeah. Are you a big skier? I know that that's pretty hype up there, if I'm right. It is.
Yeah, it is. Vancouver's great for so many different outdoor activities. There's water activities, there's snow activities, summer hiking, everything. There's so much nature in Vancouver, but it's also so close to the city, so it's a nice balance. I'm not particularly good with skiing and sport, but I like walking in nature a lot, and Vancouver has pretty good tame weather compared to the rest of Canada, so it's nice.
Yeah, I am similar. I am not a big sporty person, but I like being outside. I guess I mean there's a few sport. I like tennis. I like, there's a few things, but generally speaking, I tend to stick to the hiking as well.
Yeah.
Amazing. And so are you when you go to the coffee shop, what's your coffee order? Are you black coffee? Do you like what's your coffee order?
I'm a iced oat milk latte girl
Ooh, all right. Even do you get the iced even in winter or is it
all year round.
all year round? Awesome. Well, that makes it consistent. It feels like you can get, it's nice to have something that you can get whenever and feel like you don't have to change your order.
Yeah, and I think most coffee shops make it pretty good. It's not too complicated, so I always get what I want.
Oh, that's a good point. Like it's
Yeah,
ubiquitous enough to where you can get it to whatever coffee. That's a good point. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
that's fair. Amazing. Okay, so we hear that you do you prefer to doodle and draw at home, or do you like to draw out in the wild at these coffee shops or elsewhere?
A bit of both. Mostly at home. I I invested in an iPad like beginning of pandemic or just before pandemic, and it's a game changer. I draw everywhere, but mostly at home. I will sometimes go to cafes with friends and we'll just have a drawing session for the afternoon, and it's super fun.
Oh, that sounds cathartic to do with, I usually think of drawing and art as a solo practice, but every time I hear of people who do it in community, I'm like, that sounds really lovely. I like, just even as it's introspective, doing that with someone else is still very enticing for me as a thought.
Oh yeah, it's great. It's a great pastime that my friends and I do. We're all in the animation industry and we all love art. So we draw, we bounce ideas off of each other. We have good food and good company, It's great.
That sounds really nice. Now I'm jealous. This sounds amazing.
Hey, come join me anytime.
Yeah, I am typically my art. I use quotes here. I am more of a musician, um, and so I'm gonna have to be like, okay, I'm just gonna come play piano next to y'all.
Oh, that sounds so nice. A little background music.
Yeah, we'll have a whole group, I'm sure, soon after we. If you're listening and you want to join the crew, let us know.
Yes, join us.
You can all come to Vancouver and hang out. Amazing. Okay. So we've gotten to know you as Nasus the person. Tell me about Nasus the animation supervisor. I'm curious, how did you get involved with the Dragon Prince?
Yeah, so this goes way back. I worked at Bardell previously with a bunch of people on a different project. And then when Dragon Prince started back in season one, um, Carlisle was the animation director there along with Maru. But I worked with Carlisle previously and he reached out and he was like, "Hey, we got this really cool project coming up. Do you wanna come work with a bunch of our old crew?" And I loved the crew so much. So of course I joined. And yeah, I started all the way from season one as just a regular animator. And I worked my way up to season three still as an animator, but I worked really hard and I really wanted to do a leadership role of some kind. And then, there was a big break. Um, and then Maru, the other animation director, reached out to me actually around the time that I was losing my job at the time. And he was like, "Hey, we have a supervisor role. Are you interested in coming back?" And I was like, "This is the fate." Yeah, I was so excited. So I said, yes, of course. But I was very new to supervising. I'd only supervised on a previous show for a couple months. So I was really, really scared and really nervous. Dragon Prince is so dear to my heart and it's
Mm.
so well written. The fans are incredible and I just didn't want to disappoint. So I was really nervous. I wanted to do a really good job. Um, and I think I did okay. It was really fun. I learned so much. The team was fantastic. And I grew so much just as a leader, as an artist and everything. It was really fun.
Yeah, that's so amazing. It's an interesting pathway to think about in terms of leadership in any area, I think, because just because you have the skills as the base job, I'm going to use that in quotes too. So as an animator, supervising animators doesn't use the same skills, right? It uses different skills.
Yeah.
And that's the same for any profession, right? If you're a teacher, supervising a group of teachers and leading a group of teachers is very different than teaching a classroom or again, pick the industry. And it's really neat to hear that they saw in you this leadership potential in addition to your artistic talent. And so I'm just kind of feeling all the warm fuzzies to imagine what it feels like to be reached out to in that event. I'm like, yay, that's amazing.
Yeah, it honestly it was a dream come true. I remember season one, like our first episode that I worked on. Um, I was just like enamored. I was like, this is the coolest show ever. The writers are fantastic, the directors are fantastic, the characters look so cool. Everything was just like I was like, this is the coolest show ever. I can't believe I'm even a part of it. And the fact that I get to supervise as well, I was like, this is incredible. It's such a great experience. Definitely a core memory of mine for sure to be on this show.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can't imagine being able to just witness it unfold over the past 5 years. I'm so grateful that you had that experience and you continue to have it. That's amazing. I want to kind of point us now towards even more specificity here. We've kind of been talking about you and the Dragon Prince at large. I want to talk about you and the Dragon Prince in this episode. You are kind of our primal source for this episode of the podcast and for this episode of the show. So I'm curious, like what you mentioned that you were the animation supervisor in particular for this episode. I'm curious, what does behind the scenes look like for an animation supervisor? What are the actual job responsibilities? Because I can like imagine or make things up of what I think you do, but I have really no idea.
Yeah, definitely. So I ran a team of about I think it was like 8 people. Um, 4 of them were in-house and 4 of them were overseas. So that was very interesting. It was the first time I'd gotten to do that. And then what I do is I get a list of all the shots in the episode and I cast it out. So basically I assign each animator based on their skill level, their what they requested, and basically try to make it as fair as possible for the amount of time that we have to do an episode. And that's sort of their quota for this episode. And then we go into layout first. And my job for layout is basically to make sure that the cameras are correct, things are hooking up correctly, we have the right characters in the right space. I have to keep in mind like lighting, so I have to make sure that the characters are in the right sets and everything like that. We got to make sure that all the characters are correct and they got their right outfits on. So there's a lot of things that I have to keep track of. And on
Yeah.
top of that, whenever an animator finishes a shot, they'll submit it, and then I do a round of notes. So I'm like, hey, this pose doesn't look good, or can we try this instead? Let's do this acting choice, things like that.
Yeah.
And then we deliver a layout and we get some notes from the clients. And then we do a round of animation. So we have 2 rounds of animation. It's called primary and secondary. So primary would be the base action, just making sure we get the idea across, and that the clients are going to like the ideas that we have.
Yeah.
We get storyboards to follow, but the clients have been really great and allowing us to be a little more free with our ideas as well. So that's really liberating to do. And then we go through secondary, and secondary is all the polish, making it look really pretty, animating the hair, the tassels, the clothing, whatever dangly extra bits on the characters. And then we just submit it. So that's really cool. And I also do a round of notes every time we submit to the clients, just to make sure that the clients are getting the best quality that we can produce.
Yeah. Wow. I I don't know. I don't know if I'm surprised that there's only 2 rounds or if I expected more. I think I might have expected more. Um, but it kind of makes sense with all the it sounds like you're getting a lot of notes in between all of those 2 submissions. So lots of corrective feedback and making sure everything's right. And I'm hearing this responsibility for continuity between scenes and things along those lines. Lots of really cool things happening.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and then, it's cool because as we go, I'm learning a lot about the show and what the clients want, and I was remembering a lot about what season 1, 2, and 3, what the clients wanted,
Yeah.
and that helped me a lot specifically. There weren't too many original crew that came back for season 4 and 5. So some of us that were from season 1, 2, and 3 had a bit of an advantage in the sense that they already knew what the clients were looking for. They knew what was on style and not on style. Because Dragon Prince is not very cartoony. And
Yeah.
some animators love cartoony animations. Sometimes we have to dial that back a little just for show style, get more realistic acting.
Yeah, that makes sense. When you say the client, I just to clarify, is this the writing team? Is this like who are the clients, so to speak?
Totally. So a lot of it goes through a lot of different people. On the Bardell side, my animation director was Maru and Chad. And then there was also George. And then on the Wonderstorm side, I believe it went through Vila.
Got it.
Yeah, and then Justin and Aaron as well. I think at the end, I can't quite remember if they watched every pass from us.
Hmm.
And then sometimes the writers also had some notes as well, which was nice. Just gives us a little bit of background story of, 'cause, they're writing it, they know the background of everything, and we're just
Yeah.
animating it. So it's nice to have that insight as well.
Nice. Amazing. Yeah, I'm just it's so interesting to see who has their hands on what, right? And how because I hear from so many people, whether it's the voice actors, the writing team, even from Justin and Aaron and Vilas, who talk about how the Dragon Prince is especially collaborative as a in the process of creating the show. So it's just interesting to hear who has a little hand in everything. And so yeah, it's very neat.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And every project and every show is different. But I did like how Dragon Prince was run. I thought it was very collaborative, which was nice.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, let's start gearing towards more what we're going to be talking about later today. I we are talking about episode 7, Sea Legs, and we were kind of I offered to you the idea of thinking of a lens for this episode, and I had listed some potential options out of ones that we like could exist. And I mentioned fear as an example, and you were like, actually, that's really apt for this episode. And I'm curious, why fear? Why is this lens the one that you chose?
Yeah, this episode has fear everywhere, from the bait wings to Callum and everyone on Ruthless. And then there's Kimdale, the Blood Moon Huntress, who is one of my favorite characters. She's just fear. Like, she exudes so much scariness, So I thought fear was great for this episode.
Yeah, I'm excited to kind of dive in and kind of parse out what is the root of the fear for so many of these things. And I think we'll be able to dive in. But let's make sure we're on the same page. I'm curious if you can help me understand fear from your perspective. And so, is there a time in your life that you have felt fear or you have observed fear, even so that we can kind of learn a little bit more about what fear is?
Yeah, I have my whole life. I deal with a lot of anxiety, and so with anxiety comes fear all the time, and it could be anything from really big to really small. So that's something that I just struggle with in general in life. And I think that anxiety is something that everyone goes through at some point in time in their life. But for me, everything. I am a very scared person, but I try really hard to be as brave as I can. And anxiety for me is something that I struggle with. So I think even just, I know it's very personal, but even like just being on this show as a supervisor, I was so scared because this show has such a big caliber and the fans are so big. And I feel like I've talked to some of the fans and they're just um, so into the show, and I wanted to do a good
Yeah.
job. And also this was a big turning point in my career. And my career is really important to me. I work really hard. And so I just wanted to do a good job. And then there's also this fear that, there's a whole team relying on me. And I want to make sure that they can do the best that they can. And I feel like if something bad happens, it's on me. And, um, you know, to some people that's normal. That's just the job. But for me, it can be consuming. with anxiety. So that's something that I struggle with on the day to day.
And just to make sure I'm on the same page, I'm hearing from you, and tell me if this is completely way off. I'm hearing that the fear is the what is, let me, rather than guess, what is the story that's kind of going through your head when you imagine what might go wrong? Like, where is what is the story you're telling yourself that is leading to the anxiety and fear? Does that make sense as a
Yeah,
question?
yeah, totally. I usually start with one thing and then it kind of spirals.
Yeah.
So, like if we are near a deadline and we're pretty behind, like that's on me, and that I don't want to fail. I don't want to fail myself. I don't want to fail my team,
Mhm.
the project, and just the fear of failure is quite scary for me. And I like doing a good job. I like making sure that everything I do is as the best that I can produce, whether it is animation supervising or even just my art or literally anything in my life. I think that fear of failure is very looming on me. So that's sort of what I go through. And, I know that it sounds sometimes some people are like, oh, it's okay to fail. But it's just something that I deal with. And I think everyone has something that they deal with that might be small for other people and really big for them. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and I think it's interesting too, because it's one thing to say, like, yeah, just fail, it'll be okay. Um, right. And I think that for some people over time, that is something that can become more innocuous, but also that is not, that's just not true for everybody. And I totally understand. And I think it's a very accessible to our listeners. I think that's a very accessible and relatable experience that you're telling and sharing, is that there are things that we're scared of, where if we fail, that will lead, we think, to people thinking differently about us. It will lead
Totally.
to maybe a lack of job security. Maybe it will lead to, and the stories start with, I might fail, but then that failure means so much, and that failure turns into something so different depending upon our unique situation. What does that failure really mean to Callum? What does it mean to Rayla versus what does it mean to you, Nasus? Right. And so we all have this different experience, and I think that's really helpful as we kind of begin to parse out and lean into the episode. That gives us a good starting point to ask the same question, like, okay, this is scary for this character, but where's that coming from? What can we imagine is the story they're telling themselves? Um, yeah, thank you so much for your vulnerability and willing to kind of share that. I very much relate.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, I'm a big believer on healthy mental health. And so that's totally like, my art and drawings help me a lot with my anxiety. And it helps. I've gotten messages of other people being like, your art really brings me calmness. And I think that that's so important, just to find that little peace in this chaotic world. I don't know
Yeah.
if that's kind of poetic, but
Yeah, no, I mean it is, and I'm here for it. So that's awesome. Okay, so before we dive into the episode and learn more about fear and what it does, I want to remind our listeners of what happened in the episode, and this is, of course, our chance for a 30-second recap of the episode. So Nasus, would you like to go first or second for this 30-second recap?
yeah, I'll go first.
Amazing. I can count you in whenever you're ready.
Cool, I'm ready.
All right. 30 seconds on the clock. Three, two, one, action.
Oh, so yeah, this episode's full of action, a lot of fighting, a lot of water. We officially get introduced to all the Baitlings, Sneasel, Jellybug, and Hats. And then we get this really epic fight with Janai and Kimdale infiltrating the Fire Elves. So it's really cool, very exciting, and a lot of action. And also we get to see sea legs in action. So that's my time.
Ding. Very good. Yeah, that was amazing. All right. If you'll do me the honors, I'll time it, but you can count me in.
Yeah, sounds good. All right, you ready?
I'm gonna do
Three,
my best.
2, 1, go.
All right, so Ezrin wakes up to these cute little baitlings, and then Nyx and Vilas are debating about captainship, and then Kimmy Girl is sneaking by the guards, and then Callum blows too hard, and then Soren and Zim save Hat, and then Kim drinks blood and then kills people, and then Gar lasts teeth, and then Janai fights Kimmy, and then they get captured, and then Sea Legs catches the Ruthless because legs, and then Finnegrin gets like special use for the boy, and then Amaya and Corvus are alive and learn Janai is gone. 30 seconds.
Wow, that was so much more detailed. I love that.
I uh, yeah, everybody like sees different things and pays attention to like it just happens that way.
You're good at that.
Thank you. I have been honing this skill for for 5 years. Um, Amazing. Okay, that brings us to the the big discussion, where we get to talk about fear in the episode. And so I'm gonna toss it straight to you. What is a moment that you want to kind of talk about regarding fear in this episode?
Yeah. Ooh, there's so many. I think the biggest one that was the pressure of this episode in the sense that I don't know if you read the graphic novels of Dragon Prince, but there was one released about the Blood Moon Huntress, and she looked just so cool. And I had read that one before getting this episode. And I was like, oh, when we get this episode, I want to make sure it's the greatest episode. She's just too cool to not do justice. So that was a big fear. And the other big fear was that Vilas um, is a big sailor, like in real life.
Right.
And so there was a lot of pressure on us to make sure that all the sailing terms were correct, that we were using the sails correctly. So I did so many hours of sailing research and watching sailing videos to make sure it was accurate to the sailor community. So that was really, really intense and very scary. And, I think we did a good job. We last really liked the episode. So that was a big fear of mine. I think it's important to make sure that things are accurate.
Yeah, no, this is really interesting to think about from this meta perspective around the fear that you experienced in the making of the episode. Um, yeah, I think not only is Kim Dael like a scary character, right? But also
Hmm.
honoring the image that has been created of her, making sure that we are, doing right by her scariness in a way, right? That's super neat. Yeah. And then with Vilas too, I'm hopeful that we get to hear from Vilas this season. We might have just I'm recording this episode before the previous episode. So everybody, you're hearing a meta conversation here. Uh, And so I'm hopeful that you will have heard last episode from Vilas, but if not, uh, you got to hear from me, and that's super cool. Um, yeah, amazing. I think that I want to dive in, and if I can take your lead here, um, you mentioned Kim Dael first, and I want to kind of lean into this idea of um, why she's scary, and it feels for me like the fear of her kind of stems from this fear of the unknown, because most of the people who encounter her in the episode, especially early on, they see something run by and they see footprints, but they don't see her. And so what
Yeah.
it does is it creates this fear of the unknown almost. Um, right? Does that make sense? Is that on par?
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like in a horror film. It's like the anticipation before you see the actual monster. That
Yeah.
you just know that there's something there. You can't picture it. You don't know what it looks like. And it's scary. It's the anticipation of not knowing anything about it. It's kind
Yeah.
of cool. I think they did a really good job of that.
Well, and it's interesting too, because even the writing kind of leads us to what happens when we are scared because something's happening, but we don't know what it is. And I'm not saying that ghosts don't exist if you believe that, but in this show, they turn to ghosts to explain what's going on, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Is it a ghost? Ah! And I think oftentimes people in real life will do something similar. If you can't explain it, you attempt to explain it using a fear-inducing thing like ghosts. Like you could just say, "Oh no, it was just the wind," which some people do, but then it's like, "Oh, it was a ghost." Um, and that's what happens in this episode. And I'm curious, not because I'm scared of ghosts, but because I'm interested in why we attempt to explain it with something that most of the time people don't actually buy into that as a description. Uh,
Yeah.
I'm curious about that, and I don't have an answer. I'm not, but I'm curious what your thoughts are.
I mean, yeah, I don't have a full answer either. I think for me specifically, if you can put an idea or a solid visual of something, then it seems less scary. And I think it sort of calms you a little bit if you're like, oh, I don't know what that is. Because I think the unknown is scarier than the known. So if you're like, oh, it's the wind or something, then it's like, okay, that's okay. It's justified. It's not scary. Or even if you're like, it's a ghost, then it's like, okay, well, ghosts don't really, if that's what you believe, like ghosts don't really exist,
Yeah.
then it's okay, you know. But if you don't know what it is at all, it could be anything. That's scarier, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's interesting because, there's a common phrase of the you choose the devil you know over the devil you don't.
Hmm.
And it feels like that's kind of an expression of fear, right? I'd rather choose this thing that is a known capacity, even though I know it's bad, than the fear of what could be and what might go wrong, right? If it were something else. Which is really interesting because I think that leads more to this fear of, well, our imagination is so much worse usually than reality, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And I think your story earlier really spoke to that, right? And I don't mean to undermine anyone's anxiety, but I think often when we feel anxious, and I say we because I certainly experience anxiety as well, I think often our stories are so much worse than what actually might happen. Um, is that your experience too? If as you look in hindsight, maybe is that true for you, or is that just for me?
Oh, yeah. No, totally. I always hype up my fear and anxiety way more than in reality. It's difficult sometimes to ground yourself when you're in that moment because the biggest thing right now in your brain is your anxiety of whatever is causing that.
Yeah.
And it's harder to take a step back. And that's definitely something I'm working on is just taking a step back and trying to see it from not my scared point of view, but just a more logical point of view, and that can help ground me a little bit. Yeah, when you're in it, it's all consuming.
Yeah, and the stories that we tell are have a huge impact on our experience of the world. Shocker. But I'm learning to become a therapist, and I am currently practicing and seeing clients and being supervised. But one of the things that we talk about is how our thoughts impact our behaviors, impact our emotions, and vice versa for all of those things. And when we have thoughts that are, if do this, then I will fail. And if I fail, that means this. it leads down this sequential thought pattern that creates anxiety. And then we feel the emotion and the experience of anxiety. And that leads us to do certain behaviors like, nope, can't go out, or nope, have to work 3 times harder than I should. And it's a weird cycle because then when I do that and do those behaviors, it leads to more thoughts. And so it's this weird downward spiral that we experience, that kind of is rooted in fear, right?
Yeah, totally.
And so I don't know. I wonder for you, is there an example in this episode? And I'm not, I don't have anyone in mind, but is there an example of a character in this show that does a good job of not succumbing to that, or who might? I guess someone that's coming to mind for me is Janai,
Hmm.
because as soon as she hears the rumors of like, is it ghosts? Is it this? Is it that? She makes a decision that leads to her putting things into place, right? She starts talking to Miana and says, "Hey, do you trust me? Will you do this?" And is it that she's not scared, or that she is telling herself a different story about her fear? What do you think?
Yeah, yeah. Um, I think Janai is a really strong leader. And I think part of being a strong leader is not showing, you could be fearful, you could be stressed, you could be scared, whatever. But it's important as a good leader not to show it to the people below you because they look up to you. And so they want, you have to be strong enough for them, so that they also feel strong and empowered. And I think that's probably, hopefully, maybe what was they were trying to portray for Janai.
Yeah. It's interesting though, like, right? I think Janai was scared. The difference was that I think the story that she told that was visible for us as viewers, was that led her to create a plan that she was able to act upon in a way, right? So she
Yeah,
heard she heard that her people, and not just her people, but the humans that were also with her, were scared of this unknown thing that was happening. And she's like, okay, I have this sneaking suspicion that something's coming after the sun seed. And so I'm going to do my best to protect it. Hey, Miana, will you trust me? I think that she's in this moment. We know that she's scared for Amaya, right?
yeah,
She's wondering, she's worried where she is. She's really like, but she's not letting that affect her decision making in this moment. Um, and I wonder if it's because the story she's telling herself is that Amaya is really capable. I know that I'm scared for her safety, and I know that she's probably doing perfectly fine because she's super capable.
yeah,
Um,
totally.
but I wonder if she would have acted very differently if that was not the story she was telling herself about Amaya, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think the fact that Amaya is such a strong character, and both of them have been through a lot of scary things.
Yeah, they have.
I think that the threshold of what they can handle is much higher, and the confidence that they have in each other as well, I think is very strong. And they both believe that they're both really cool, amazing fighters and leaders, and so I think the confidence in each other to be able to handle certain things, I think is much higher than, you know, say if there was a Kim Dale in real life coming to attack me, I think most of my friends would be pretty fearful for me because I don't go through those things. So I feel like,
Uh,
yeah, they're strong warriors, and so I
so
think they also have to, I think, be confident in it. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to do their leadership job that they're
yeah.
doing, you know.
So what you're pointing to here is the value of experience, right? And
Yeah.
so what I'm hearing is that having gone through scary things successfully gives us the experience and the capacity to tell ourselves a story that ends differently than it might have been if we didn't have that experience.
Yeah,
Does
definitely.
that make sense? Did I say
Yeah,
that?
that's totally what I was trying to say. Yeah.
Yeah, so I that's super interesting though, right? So thinking about your story going from animator to animation supervisor is interesting. You had a different amount of experience. You had an experience with this team, and that I wonder if that experience gave you more or less fear, because I can think and see how you might have said, "Oh, I know exactly what they're looking for, and we have a bunch of new animators, and but instead you tell yourself a different story and say, okay, I know what they want. That gives me an advantage." And that's how you phrased it earlier, was that you had that experience which gave you more insight and therefore advantage. Um, which is interesting to think about, how two people can go down the same path and still tell themselves very different stories around things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, definitely, definitely. I think our whatever we're thinking, like our brain, um really dictates how we see the world, right? Obviously. But I think the narrative that we tell ourselves helps dictate how we um what's the word? Go through life and how we react to things. Yeah, so like I had the knowledge of season one, two, and three, and I learned a lot about what the clients wanted. And that really did help me and a few others from the original crew tackle these episodes. Because for everyone else, like even just the show style, it's animated on twos, is very different from other shows. And so new animators coming on had to learn that as well. And so, building your eye for animation also for specific shows, is very difficult. So if I didn't have that experience beforehand, it would have been harder to lead a crew.
Yeah,
Um, and also just to like touch on like being scared. I think there were definitely times where I was leading this team and, things happen. Nothing ever goes according to plan.
of course.
Um, yeah, especially in animation. And I think it was very helpful to try my best not to show the team when things went horribly wrong,
Mm,
and to just provide solutions instead. Keeping the team calm and like their morale high is so important, and it helps them produce the best work that they can and be passionate and excited about
yeah.
the project and whatever they're working on, even if things aren't working. I tried to make, the experience really fun and exciting and bonding the teams. And I think that's important. Like what I was touching on before, like as a good leader, you want to make sure that the people below you are having are not stressed out about the things that you're stressed out about, because they look up to you and they look at you for guidance. And if you're struggling, then they might struggle as well.
Yeah. Well, I think what you're pointing to here is the importance, and I think this is what you were hinting at with Janai as well, in terms of like the responsibility for how we respond to fear is in, like, there's a like culture setting. And what I'm hearing you say is that, being the supervisor, you felt this responsibility to set a culture in which they felt supported, and like you could have responded to that fear by going and reacting by blaming them when they messed up and said, "Hey, you can't mess this up because this is going to mean X, Y, and Z and blah, blah, blah." But it sounds like the way you responded was with the intent of creating a culture where the stakes aren't so high, right? Uh,
Yeah, I tried for sure.
Yeah, and of course, who knows whether you accomplish that or not, right? But that's the
Yeah.
goal.
Yeah.
Um, and the only way to tell is by talking to your team. Um, but I'm seeing this in the show too, around culture setting and the importance and value of language. And I see that in two places. One, the very description of Erebos incites fear, right? Like
Yes.
Rayla's description at the very beginning of the episode, I paused immediately and started typing because I was okay. This just describing Erebos makes him sound so scary, and regardless of its truth or not, what it does is the way she said it, the tone of her voice, all of it, like said you should be scared of this is right.
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
and I wonder how much power that gives Erebos, right? Because
hmm
the more people are scared of him, the it changes how people react. It changes how people interact with the idea of him. And I sometimes I wonder if cultivating fear is a intentional tactic that is used by people who are evil, frankly.
Oh, I
um,
believe that. Yeah, for sure.
right, right. And
Yeah.
so specifically, that's one side of it. The other side of it is Finnegan, who does the same thing, right? This is really interesting because Vilas starts telling a story of they say when he captures you, he flips a coin, and then like
Yeah.
if it flips one way, it's bad, and if it flips another, you wished it flipped the other way. And just the rumors and stories that circulate around Finnegan inspire fear, which is, I think, again, a tactic that Finnegan uses to create and cultivate control over his crew and over people in Scumport. Okay, I just talked for a lot. Like, how is that resonating with you? Does that seem like does that seem reasonable conclusion?
Oh, definitely. I 100% agree. I think half the fear is like imagination. If you've never met, like say Erebos or Finnegan, but you hear all these stories, then your imagination runs wild, and you build up this narrative that's probably scarier than they actually are. And I think that's what, horror films do. They build up this anticipation where you don't know what this thing looks like, what it actually is, but you hear all these little things that give you a taste of what it could be, and you let your imagination run a little wild, and that builds up that fear for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So for me, that begs the question is how do we counteract it? Um, and I don't know if I have a good answer, but I'm curious if there's an example in the show, and I don't know, but what makes this less powerful? Like, how do we I think about, the goal of this conversation and all of our podcast episodes is to create more insight as to how to respond to these things in our own lives. And so when people are, quote, fear mongering and spreading rumors that are really scary, and when people who are sharing like and spreading fear, what counteracts that? And I'm curious if anything comes to mind for you from the episode or not.
Yeah. I think for real life, I think part of it is using a little bit more of your logical brain, taking whatever it is at face value versus what your imagination is doing. I think that's really important to try to ground yourself. And being maybe, um, I don't know, like it's kind of hard. I think it's also different for everyone, everyone experiences fear and a little bit differently.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I'm wondering as you speak and as I ruminate on this question, I'm wondering about the value of like contextualization as a tool. And what I mean by that is uh, putting data in the mix. And this is, I think, kind of what you're speaking to, and you talk about the logical brain. But if I tell myself a story that everyone's going to think this, and that's the fear that I'm grappling with. Okay, who is everyone? Like, okay, let's break that down. Who is everyone? Oh, well, really just this person. Okay. Have they ever responded that way? Well, no, but well, hold on. Okay, let's think about, like, when have you done this? Have you ever done this before? Well, yeah, and how did it go? Actually, it went pretty well. And I just think as we continue to normalize and go through these contextualization, where we actually put ourselves in the moment and ask ourselves, like, what is actually the worst that could happen? Um, we can kind of talk ourselves out of it. But again, as you said, one, that takes time. and,
Yeah,
and
definitely.
and two, in the moment, that is really hard to do. And I think that's what you had said, that it's in the moment, it's really difficult.
Yeah, I mean, when you're in that moment, it's consuming you and you're in your head, and it's important to try to take a step back, get out
Yeah,
of your head and really be in reality versus your brain in your head, you know.
yeah. You know who I think does a good job of this in the episode is Soren.
Yes. Oh,
Uh,
he's great at that.
yeah, like, and it's interesting to think about, like, why does Soren do really well at this? Because the Baitling falls in the water. I think, which one was it? Hat falls in the water. Um, and oh no, Leviathan, and everybody's like, has a different reaction to this Leviathan. And I think it's telling how people respond. Some people are like, "Oh my God, Leviathan!" And then Velas is like, "Nope, it's just that's those are the signs of Leviathan," which doesn't, that calmness that Velas exudes is, I think, stemming from his experience, right? Nope, I
Yeah.
know exactly what a Leviathan sounds like, and that's what that is. And okay, we're just going to keep moving along. That's the vibe I got from his description and his tone. Um, and then there's Soren, who's like, well, Baitling's in the water. I'm going to dive in and save it. um, I would not dive in and save it. I'm going to be real. That's terrifying. That is a
Yeah.
thing that would eat me. Um, and it's interesting because not only does he just dive in literally head first to save this Baitling, but this, as the Leviathan swims away and he gets this rope, he looks back and says, what do you think? I'm not going to taste good? Um, and I, I'm curious what your take is on this. Like, why is Soren so not scared in this moment?
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with what he was like in the first few seasons. He
Mm,
was kind of the I guess stereotypical big dumb jock, you know. He goes
mm,
in head first into all the action. He wants to show that he's the best. He's a good fighter, things like that. And throughout the episodes and throughout the seasons, he's definitely grown as a character to more than just that, you know, big dumb jock. But he still has those moments where he's action first and thinks later. And I'm sure that's just how he grew up, you know, so much pressure of being like a great fighter and, you know, protector. And so I think he's very much got that, oh, I'll dive in head first and then I'll think about the consequences later. And he's very like into thrill and action and
yeah.
you know, things like that.
Well, and I think what it's precisely what you're speaking to is really interesting, because on the one hand, we have the worriers who are like, oh, well, the unknown. Oh gosh, what if this happens? And the spiraling of what could happen on one hand, of the people who do too much thinking, perhaps, before acting. And then the complete opposite of perhaps quite not thinking enough.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
or jumping in literally to almost the gaping maw of a Leviathan. Um, and it's just interesting to me to think about, like just putting those juxtaposed to one another of how these are the two extremes. One jumps in head first without thinking about the consequences, and the other extreme thinking about the consequences so much that it's paralyzing and you don't act at all, right? Like those
Yeah.
are that feels like two opposing opposites. Um, and I think what we're learning here is the difference is how much you think about what the fear will lead to, like the future orientedness of what the fear is telling you. um is that right? Does that seem right to you?
Yeah. Yeah. And just fear of consequence, I think.
Mm-hmm.
The Soren kind of lacks that, and then most people have too much of that.
Yeah. So the question then, as we kind of use these characters to kind of see these extremes, is how do we find that happy middle? How do we find the balance, so to speak, between letting fear restrict us and not listening to fear enough to the point that our self-preservation is perhaps in question? um, I'm curious what the where the balance is and what people who do this really well look like.
Yeah. When you find out, let me know.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's interesting, right? Because I think that we all kind of oscillate between these two things, and some of us spend way more time in the anxiety mode versus the Soren mode, is how I'm going to label that. Um, it's really interesting because I think we all have something to learn from both, and
Yeah.
figuring out how we can find our own personal balance is something that I think we all can kind of begin to ask the question of. Um,
Yeah.
right?
Definitely. I think it's important to have as much of a balance of that as you can, but it's hard, it's probably the biggest thing hurdle in life that I deal with, is sometimes, they talk about your gut feeling, and
Yeah.
I always wonder, is it my gut or is it my anxiety? Which one is leading me astray? Which one's leading me correctly?
Well, and what's interesting, and I think what is really beautiful about our bodies is that, anxiety is there for a reason, right? It is uh, doing the work of protecting us. And sometimes our brain intellectually can see something that is causing us anxiety and be like, this isn't that scary. Why are you anxious about it? But our body has learned over time that this is a reaction that protects us, right? This is something that keeps us safe. And so how do we begin to kind of like, I'm really grateful, and speaking to ourselves, like I'm really grateful for the anxiety that has kept me safe for so long. And I want to give you permission to not feel anxious in this moment, because I think we're brave enough to take this on and we're going to be okay. Right? Like, how do we
Yeah.
begin to like honor the fact that anxiety did us justice for a long time and kept us safe, and not so helpful in this moment?
Yeah, but it's a big struggle for sure.
Yeah. If people are interested in resources, I highly recommend checking out Hillary McBride's work. She is a clinical psychologist from Canada, who has done incredible work, and I really appreciate her work. So that's one person I might recommend if people are interested. Okay, Nasus, do we have any other moments that we want to talk about around fear in this episode?
Ooh, I think there's so many. Ooh, I think one of the cool things that I thought we tried really hard to show was when Kimdale enters for the first time and we see all the guards, locking the door, and then you see her come in through under the door through the blood. Um, I thought that was really cool, and I wanted so badly to make it as scary as we could. And seeing it in like after lighting is just so beautiful. I was very nervous though because, you know, there's so many like TV show ratings or Netflix ratings where, you have to make sure that it's for the correct age audience. And this episode was, you see her stabbing guards. You literally see her claws come through the other end of a guard's stomach. And I was really nervous that this wasn't going to air. I was like, oh, is Netflix going to be okay with
They
this?
cut it. Yeah.
No, but they let it through. I'm so happy. It's such a cool scene. I think it's very scary. And it was probably the darkest thing I'd ever worked on.
Pretty
It's
dark.
really cool. It's
Pretty dark.
really dark.
Yeah. I think what scares me the most is that and this goes back to this fear of the unknown, I think, is that I don't know what she can do, what she's capable of. And I don't
Yeah.
think it's very clear that these guards have never seen anything like this in combat. And they are just like literally incapable of doing anything in response to how she fights. And I think that that's terrifying, right? The fact that
Yeah.
you know what this is really reminding me of? It's reminding me of just the ocean arcanum, which is accepting that there are things that we'll never know, right? That the
Yeah.
ocean is so deep that there is so much that we'll just never be able to control it. More on that next episode. But I think that this is really reminding me of like how awe-inspiring the ocean is, and how just because of there's just so much that we'll never know. um it's awe
Yeah.
to think about Kimdale and what she's capable of, you know.
Totally. And I think also the something that's comforting for people is being able to prepare. And if you don't know what you're preparing for, then you can't prepare. So
Yeah.
like these guards didn't know what they were up against. They don't know if it was human, if it was an elf, if it was a monster. But they didn't know anything. So how do you prepare for something like that? They didn't even know how big she was, you know? So I wouldn't know how to, I would not want to be in their shoes for sure.
Well, and I think it's really interesting to think about how, like, for some people it's really paralyzing to just get up in the morning because of, oh gosh, if I wake up and go outside, like a comet could drop at any moment. Like they're like the possibility of what might happen versus the logic of like, no, that's very unlikely. And you can talk yourself out of anything, but you can also talk yourself into anything. And it's just interesting to me, like some people really struggle to just get up out of the bed because of how paralyzing the unknown can be. And then some people have no mind of it. And again, it's this weird, like, again, balance between I want to be realistic and know what could go wrong so that I could do my best to plan around it. But I also want to balance the idea that I will never be able to plan for everything, for every possible thing that could go wrong. I can't rain plan everything. Um, so how do I learn to live with this unknown that is always going to exist in my life? And that brings in the ocean arcanum.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's big scary. And Janai, oh, could you Siri's joining us in the conversation. I'm Janai's really interesting in this because Janai sees Kindale and is not scared. Or if she is certainly incredibly capable in this moment, right? Where
Yeah.
she is fighting better and more readily than any of the guards, right? She is, and I don't know if that speaks because I don't know if that's literally because she's more powerful or if that's because she just has a different mindset going into this fight. Um, but it's really interesting to think about how she's more comfortable with the unknown here, it seems like. And part of me wonders, is that one of the reasons that she is queen is that she's in a leadership position. um I don't know.
I think so, definitely. I think um, it's definitely important to have those attributes as a leader, as a good leader at least. Um, and that's probably why we had to portray her that way because we want to portray Janai as someone who is a very good and strong leader.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I think that she is, the royal family, right, so to speak. uh,
Yeah.
and it's interesting to beg it, does this beg the question around, was this teachable? Was she taught this mindset because of her station, or was it her station that taught her this mindset? And I don't have an answer. I don't know. But it's interesting and maybe it's a combination of both, but it's interesting that no one leading up to this could do anything about Kimdale until Janai, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and it just begs the question, why? Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't have a great answer.
Yeah. I don't have an answer either, but I do have thoughts about it. I think you definitely mentioned whether it was how she was raised or if it's her experiences. I think it's a little bit of both. And I think it's also some people have that leadership in them. Like I think it's the nurture versus nature type thing. I think some people are just really good at being a leader. Not to say that you can't become one,
Yeah,
but some
yeah,
people just innately really good at it, and I think Janai is probably one of them.
yeah. I think that, leadership is rooted in skills just like any other thing. And I think that some people pick up on those skills just as easily or as you picked up art, right? Some
Yeah.
might say that you are and have been an artist. Um, but you've been cultivating those skills and working on them for a long, long time. And I think that Janai was maybe proficient in some of these skills early on because of her station and because of the way that she was raised, and she's been working on them for a long, long time, and therefore she's better and good at this quote leadership, so to speak. um but yeah, it's interesting to think about all of this for sure. Okay, I want to be mindful of time and note that we are working our way downtown. And I would love to give our listeners a little musical break, and we'll come back shortly to dive into our final couple of segments. All right, everyone, welcome back. We're glad that you're still with us listening to an incredible episode with myself and Nasus Lee. We are here for our final couple of segments. We're about to dive into our sacred practice for this episode, and we are introducing the Wonder Square. And the Wonder Square is a really neat practice that was introduced to me in my graduate education in divinity school. And it is a practice that helps us dive more deeply into a particular text, in this case, the Dragon Prince. And we're going to use this practice to dive more deeply into a random line, random quote from this episode. And so before this, I stopped my button on a random time. And of course, this is the line that we chose. He took their wind away, which is a really interesting line, if I do say so myself.
That's
And
a
so,
good line.
right, isn't it good?
Yeah.
So, what this practice asks of us is to think about it in this line from four different perspectives. What does this line make us think? What does it make us feel? What does it make us want to do? What is it calling us to do? And then finally, what are the lingering questions? What is it making us wonder? And typically, when you do this, it's in a 2x2 grid where you have think, feel, do, wonder in each of those squares. But instead, we're going to do it in the audio version, which is going through it one by one. And we're just going to do it in a step-by-step fashion. So, Nasus, are you ready to embark on the journey of the Wonder Square?
I'm ready.
All right, we're going to start first with think. So I'm going to read the line one more time. And this is, what does it make you think of in terms of literally? It can be about the show, it can be about your personal life, it can be about a random story, which is what does it make you think of in or out of context? Here's the line. He took their wind away.
I think that line is so cool. When I first got the episode, I watched it and I watched that line specifically a few times because I didn't understand what was happening at first. And as the crew as well, besides Rayla, I don't think anyone understood what happened and what Callum was doing. So I think that's really cool that Rayla is the one to catch on what he was doing.
Yeah, you make a good point. We forgot to like where does this line come from? And you've just given us the context, which is this is Rayla telling everybody on the Ruthless what Callum did after he does this spell and takes in this big breath. He steals the wind from Finnegrin's ship. Um, Thank you for contextualizing that.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, so thinking about how Rayla was the first one to be able to notice and have that insight into Callum, when everybody else was like, "What's going on?" Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really interesting. You know what? I'm like it is still a sea metaphor, a ship metaphor, but I think about like the wind beneath the sails literally being taken away from somebody, and how that's a metaphor for taking the inspiration or taking the motivation away from somebody as well. And it's making me think about how like Callum has the potential to take people's motivation in this way, right? It's an interesting thought to be like, if I were to say that like he took their wind away to someone outside of the Dragon Prince context, it would be a metaphor perhaps for he took their energy, their willingness to try. And there's a lot of ways to accomplish that, which is an interesting thought.
Yeah, I think that line is so powerful in many ways. It's such a simple, to the point line, but
Yeah,
I think it has a lot of meaning as well.
yeah. Okay, so I think we could probably spend a lot of time continuing to say what else it makes us think of, but that's step one. We've kind of got an understanding of what's coming to mind for us when we think of this line. And so step two, we're going to kind of dive a little bit deeper here into what is this making us feel? Like physically in our bodies, what does this line make us feel? But also what emotions bubble to the surface as you think of this line. And I'll read it one more time. He took their wind away.
Yeah. Um, I think if the audience, if you go to that timestamp and you watch it and you listen to how Rayla delivered that line, it's really cool. I think it's not just her stating what he did, but she's also realizing what it is that he did. And it's incredible because he's pretty new to magic, and he did this incredible thing. He took the wind away from a really big ship and he did something on the fly to try to save them. And so just her realizing what it is that he did, I think she was impressed, she was shocked, she was amazed, and it's just really cool. So I love the way that she delivered that line. I think it makes me feel, I, I just think it was so well done.
Yeah, I'm hearing awe perhaps from you.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it like because there's two, it's kind of two-sided. Like this line from Rayla, it feels observable that she was also in awe, right? Uh,
Yeah,
of Callum. But for you, the way that she delivered the line also inspired awe in you, which is a really neat kind of meta experience of the same emotion, right? Uh,
yeah,
super cool. Um, yeah, I think when I was watching this, I paused because I wasn't sure what emotion I sensed from Rayla. For me, it almost sounded like like sadness or grief. Um, and I don't know that I would stand by that now, but when I first heard it, I was like, I wonder if it was almost like the feeling of solidarity. Like I know how much that took out of him. And part of me is scared for what he is doing to himself or had, you know what I mean? Like for what
yeah, yeah,
or and so part of me as I think about this and sink into what it feels like for me to hear this line is wow, there's a lot of power here and it makes me nervous that Callum has this much power and he for someone who's so young has to deal with the responsibility of having that power. It just makes me feel like I wish he didn't have to have this much power to have to, make these decisions that are so intense. Like that's a big deal, I guess. So
yeah. I can definitely see that for sure. Like, Rayla cares so much about Callum. I totally agree. I can see how she's not just in awe, but also concerned for because he's also um winded, I guess, from taking their wind. He's
exactly.
panting, he's tired, it took a toll on him physically for sure.
Yeah. It's just like it's a very different toll than that initial like dark magic experience that he had where he went under. But like I wonder if that is coloring her read of this moment where she saw him when he's gone too far and this was close. Um it just is it's a lot. And I wish he didn't have to do so much in order to stay safe, even if it
Yeah,
was in vain. Yikes.
yeah. And I'm sure also it kind of feels and sounds like, Rayla felt maybe helpless as
Yeah.
well because there's nothing she could do, and she's relying on this human to save them.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. Okay, so we're nailing it so far. We got two steps down.
Perfect.
So the next step is when we hear this line, what is it asking of us? Uh what does it want us to do in our everyday lives? Is it asking us to change our behavior? Is it asking us to be more mindful of something? What is it asking us to do? And so here we go. He took their wind away.
That's a good question. I guess off the top of my head, when I think about this scene, Callum just acted. I don't even, I think it goes back to the no fear of consequences. He just did it because he knew he had to do something to save their ship and their crew, and he just acted. And I don't know if he knew the consequences that it would take on his body and to do such a big action, I guess.
Yeah. So, am I hearing from you that I'm hearing that you're noticing that from Callum, but I'm curious, is that calling on you to be like Callum, or is it calling on you to do something differently? What's the action for you that it's asking?
It definitely makes me think about, you know, times when I need to act quickly for the good of everyone else around me. It's not something that I practice very often, and I think it's pretty admirable for Callum to have done that. Um, yeah, I'm not sure if this line particularly makes me feel like I want to do something,
Yeah.
um, but it definitely makes me think about it a lot.
Well, even if the action is I want to reflect more on these times where acting is asked of me quickly, right? Like
Yeah,
I wonder if even that is enough, I think, in terms of the ask.
yeah,
For me,
definitely.
I'm when I hear this line, what is it asking of me to do is be mindful of when I'm doing this intentionally versus unintentionally, right? Callum makes the intentional decision to take the wind from from this guy's sails. But I also wonder around how this can happen unintentionally, and like I took their wind away, right? Oh, I didn't mean to do that. That was not my intention. Um, and I know that there are times when I have done things or said something that metaphorically took the wind from beneath the sails and of people that I care deeply about. And so I think what it's asking of me is to pay attention to, how I'm interacting with the people around me. Am I, blowing wind into the sails of the people that I care about, or am I taking people's wind, whether that's because I'm fear mongering and to be on theme, or whether it's because of something else. So yeah, I guess I want to be someone that doesn't take people's wind away.
Yeah, that's really interesting to think about for sure. I also definitely would not want to take the wind away from people. I want to
I
give them wind and
want to be the
propel
wind
them
beneath
forward.
people's wings.
Exactly, exactly.
Oh man, I'm gonna refrain from singing, but um, okay, that brings us to our final step of this sacred practice, which is wonder. What does this question, what does this quote make us wonder? What are the lingering questions? And so for the final time, here is the line. He took their wind away.
Yeah, I wanna I kind of want to know more about like had Callum known about this? Like how did he come up with this? I wonder like how
Yeah,
did he think about taking the wind? Like that would never cross my mind to
yeah,
stop a ship. So that's such a unique tactic that I think is really interesting.
yeah. I think that's a great question. I had a similar vein, a similar thought is I'm really curious if Callum knew how taxing this spell would be on him and on his body. Because it's clear that it was a lot, right? Like he is huffing
Yeah.
for a hot minute after this. And so I wonder if he realized or knew it would cost him as much as it did. Um, that's a lingering question of mine, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Amazing. Okay, so we have successfully kind of moved through all four of these quadrants that are involved in the Wonder Square. And so we I really love doing practices like this because it just gives us, this is one line, right? In this, 22-minute episode, and we could have picked any of them. And my experience is that even the lines that are perhaps not as intense as this one still provides so much insight into this moment or the moment that is chosen. And so I'm really grateful, Nasus, that you were willing to kind of to go on this journey with me and tap into a deep dive on this line.
Yeah, this was a really cool exercise. I really enjoyed it.
Amazing. Well, that brings us to our final segment, which is one of my favorite things that we do on the show, which is gratitude. We like to pick a character from the episode that we are thankful for and share why. And this can be a meta reason, or it can be for something that they do for another character. There's all kinds of reasons you can be grateful for characters. And so I'm gonna toss it to you. Who is the character from this episode that you are thankful for and why?
Yeah, I gave this question some thought. I was gonna say Kindale because she's one of my favorite characters, but I think this one has to go to Soren. I think he was so cool this episode. He was so sweet to the Baitlings. He got attached to Hats. He
Yeah.
dove in and saved Hats, and he didn't even think about it. And his willingness to sacrifice himself for his friends is really admirable. And I love seeing him grow as a character all the way from season one till future episodes. He's really got what a huge character arc, and I think it's amazing that they chose him to be the one that goes from the mean bully to someone very dear to the crew.
Yeah. Yeah, I do love Soren.
Yeah.
And Jesse just does a remarkable job
Oh,
voice.
amazing. Yeah.
I'm really grateful for that as well. I I'm okay. So I'm really grateful, and I think this is partially because of you. But I'm really grateful for Rayla. Uh, this line that we dived into more deeply with the Wonder Square, your reaction to that and your description of Rayla and the emotions that she was feeling and things along those lines were really insightful for me. And so I see her in a different light, and I really just appreciate how caring she is for
Yeah.
Callum, and that she in just one line can communicate that so well. um and so I'm really thankful for Rayla and for the care that is so evident, that she's willing to kind of just be open and honest and vulnerable with how much she cares for Callum. So I really appreciate that about her, and I'm grateful for it.
That's so nice. Yeah. I She's such a great character.
Yeah, they're all great.
They're all great. I think the writing in this show is phenomenal, and I think there's so much good in every character, whether it's because they're a villain or a protagonist, and they're just so written so well. I feel like they are real, living, breathing characters. It's very cool.
Big shout out to the writing team for
Definitely.
continuously blowing us away. Yeah, amazing. Okay, Nasus, thank you so much. This has been an incredible conversation, and I'm really grateful that I've gotten to meet you, and that we've been able to kind of get your voice out there to, be a part of this podcast experience. I'm so thankful that you were willing to do this with me.
Thank you for inviting me. This was super fun. This was my first podcast ever. Um,
Yeah.
And it's so exciting. I was so excited and so happy. And I have so much love for the show, but specifically this episode is one of my favorites to this
Yeah.
day. And I was so happy that I got to be able to talk about it.
Amazing. Well, if people wanted to find you to continue the conversation, how would you want them to find you?
Yeah, on all social media, I am Nasus Lee, so just look me up. Um, yeah, you can find me there, reach out. I love talking to people. Um, it's great. I love people who are passionate about things that I work on.
Amazing. Yeah, I highly recommend reaching out. Clearly, Nasus is very generous with their time, so check her out. You can find her at Nasus Lee, and you can find us at BNB_pod. We have all the things, and I especially recommend checking us out on Patreon and supporting us. We have a live episode every month, and you can join us for that with us and be a part of the conversation. And there's also lots of tiers that you can sign up for, and I just recommend checking it out. And even if you can't support us financially, if you can't do that, I highly recommend writing a review on Apple Podcasts, just sharing it out, letting us know, supporting us. Really would appreciate any sort of interaction. And of course, listening is always enough, but this is just if you want to go that extra mile. All right, everyone. This has been another episode of Bending Not Breaking and the Dragon Pod. And Nasus, thank you so much for being here once more. And until next time, everyone, be well and do good.
Bye.